I'm now joined by Lawrence Wilkerson, a retired US Army colonel who was Chief of Staff to Colin Powell when he was US Secretary of State. Now, as I say, you were Colin Powell's Chief of Staff when the decision was made to invade Iraq. In 2003, he made a speech that laid out the case for that war. We'll have a listen to what he said, and then I'll ask you a couple of questions afterwards.
The most worrisome things that emerges from the thick intelligence file we have on Iraq's biological weapons is the existence of mobile production facilities used to make biological agents. Let me take you inside that intelligence file and share with you what we know from eyewitness accounts. We have first-hand descriptions of biological weapons factories on wheels and on rails.
Well, you helped prepare that speech and have since described it as the biggest mistake of your life. Why?
Primarily because we, to the American people, to the international community, and of course to the members of the UN Security Council, presented evidence that was specious. It was not accurate, it was not true, it was not valid. We didn't know that, but it was not just an intelligence failure. It was also a massive politicization of the intelligence by the leadership in Washington.
Well, we're currently seeing very similar rhetoric in relation to Syria coming from Washington. Will it end in war again?
I answered a question yesterday. A journalist called me from Israel, and I said, and I can almost quote myself, I would be highly skeptical of any intelligence rendered by the $140+ billion U.S. intelligence community as to weapons of mass destruction in the possession of another country.
But Syria is not signed up to the Chemical Weapons Convention, one of 7 countries that isn't. Does that suggest perhaps it has a reason not to be signed up to it, and it does have weapons, chemical weapons?
Well, I'm not violating any great confidence or any great prohibition in the intelligence community to tell you that we've known for years that Syria has chemical weapons stockpiles, just as Iraq had chemical weapons stockpiles for a while. But the fact that President Assad would be moving them around and preparing them for use against his own citizens within his own territory, I frankly find preposterous.
Why is it then that the US really want to pursue this and are using it for various reasons to justify not only rhetoric but also serious talk of perhaps a military invasion?
Well, a serious question was just addressed by one of your previous commentators, and that is, why in the world would we put Patriot batteries on the Turkish border ostensibly to protect Turkey, with the largest army and the most powerful army in the region, indeed one of the most powerful in the world? Turkey needs no protection by us from that sort of thing, and it would be utterly stupid for Assad to attack Turkey in that way. So why are we doing these things that look like they aren't connected to reality, unless reality is we're preparing the ground to intervene in Syria?
And what would be the implications if the US were to intervene in Syria? Some are saying the fallout would be far more dramatic than what we saw in Iraq. Would you agree with that?
I think that if we were to intervene in a substantial way, that is to say, we were to put troops on the ground, Marine soldiers and so forth, and we were to do in Syria what we began to do in March of 2003 in Iraq, those people are absolutely right. In fact, I think it would be even worse than Iraq. I think also that it would be, again, a backdoor, as it were, into Iran, which is the, as you well know, the real threat that we've been putting out there for years now. And I think we're looking at Syria and Iran being a combination that we would then take on. And you're talking about, in my view, a conflict that becomes regional and maybe even wider, because we've got Russia, we've got China, we've got other players. We just mentioned the Turks. We've got a significant interest in that region if Iran and Syria are seriously threatened by a U.S. invasion. And I think you're looking at a conflagration that's going to take at least a decade to settle. And there aren't going to be too many victors at the end of that decade, just losers.
Taking on Syria, let alone Iran, would the American people have an appetite for the U.S. to get involved in yet another overseas war?
Absolutely not, but I'm meeting with several congressmen later in the week and that is next week. And we're going to talk about this very thing about, for example, Libya having been conducted, the Libya operation, with no consultation with the Congress at all. There are some congressmen who are so concerned about this that they're mentioning words like impeachment and so forth. Because you are not supposed to take the American country, you know, you're not supposed to take us to war without the permission of the Congress. The Constitution pretty much says that. And yet we're on this track where executives start wars at their own will. And this is the kind of thing that I think is very dangerous for this republic. Iran would give that a different patina, though, because you have a Congress that is itching to go to war with Iran. So I think you're looking at a combination here, not just Syria. I think ultimately the target is Iran.
Just briefly, what is the answer then for Syria? Isn't some sort of intervention justified on humanitarian grounds? Indeed, the same justification was given for the intervention in Libya, and many would say that NATO intervention brought the conflict to an end, deposed Colonel Gaddafi, and ended the loss of innocent lives. Couldn't you apply the same to Syria?
Well, I would differ with that resolution in Libya. Libya still is having enormous problems. We have disconcerted Mali. We have a government being overthrown in Mali. We have al-Qaeda operating in the north of Mali, all as a result, partially at least, of what we did in Libya. So I would be very hesitant to classify Libya as a success. Syria, Iran would be even less classifiable as a success in my view. What you would have there, I think, as I said, is a long-term occupation, increasing insurgency, increasing civil war-like fighting, and so forth. The answer in Syria, I think, as lamentable as the casualties are, is to let the Syrians settle the situation for the Syrians. Now, let me hasten to add, there are a lot of Iranians on the ground fighting with Assad's forces, advising Assad's forces, and since that's taking place, it gives a better reason for us to take on Syria, because we are going to encounter Iranians in Syria if we go into Syria.
Well, the Russian
but this is not the time to be doing this.
Sure. Just to add, the Russian point of view, of course, it agrees with your sentiment that let this problem be sorted out by Syria. Do you think perhaps, judging by the way we're seeing the rebels seemingly making significant ground against the Assad regime, do you think perhaps they could succeed in deposing Assad as they stand at the moment?
I think Assad's days are numbered. I don't know what those numbers are. I didn't think that he would last through 2012. He apparently is going to do that. He may hang on. He's got several factions in Syria who are powerful and still with him. But I still think that the best resolution for Syria is a resolution brought about by the majority of the Syrian people. If they can get their act together to the point where the opposition, as it were, to Assad is solid enough and has enough good leadership to topple him, then that's what should happen. And there should be no outside assistance. And that goes for Iran, too. Iran should get its people out of Syria and let Syria handle its problems by itself.
Lawrence Wilkerson, really interesting to talk to you. Retired US Army Colonel and former Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell, joining us live there in Washington. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.